The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Kensington Palace as Prince William adjusted his navy blue suit jacket for the third time. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cool London air, but from the weight of what lay ahead. Today would mark a turning point in his life. Though he didn't fully understand it yet, Catherine, now the Princess of Wales, stood before her bedroom mirror. Carefully applying the final touches of her makeup, her reflection showed a woman who had grown into her role with grace and determination, yet today felt different. The butterflies in her stomach reminded her of their early courtship, days when every public appearance felt like stepping onto a stage where the whole world watched. The palace staff moved with their usual efficiency, but there was an electricity in the air that everyone could feel. Margaret, Catherine's longtime dresser, noticed how the princess kept glancing toward the window where crowds were already beginning to gather. The people had come from all corners of the United Kingdom and beyond, drawn by something they couldn't quite name but desperately needed to witness. William walked through the palace corridors, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors. Each portrait of his ancestors seemed to watch him with knowing eyes, as if they understood the significance of this day better than he did. He paused before a photograph of his mother, Princess Diana, her warm smile offering comfort across the years. Today would be about connecting with people in a way she had mastered so effortlessly. The princess emerged from her private chambers wearing an elegant emerald, a dress that complemented her auburn hair beautifully. The color choice was intentional, representing hope and renewal, though she hadn't consciously planned it that way. Sometimes the heart knows what the mind hasn't yet realized. In the palace's main drawing room, their children played quietly under the watchful eye of their nanny. Prince George concentrated intensely on a puzzle, while Princess Charlotte hummed softly to herself as she arranged her dolls. Little Prince Louis toddled between them, his laughter filling the room with innocent joy. None of them fully understood why today felt so important to the adults around them. But children have an amazing ability to sense when something special is happening. The Royal Protection Officers conducted their final security briefings, their professional demeanor hiding their own curiosity about the day's events. They had seen many royal engagements. The atmosphere today felt uniquely charged with anticipation and emotion. Outside, the crowds continued to grow. People held handmade signs, bouquets of flowers, and cameras, but more importantly, they held hope. An elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson had traveled from Yorkshire, carrying a letter she had written but never sent after her husband's death. A young father clutched his toddler daughter's hand, wanting her to witness something beautiful in a world that often seemed harsh. A group of students from a local school had been given permission to attend. Their excitement barely contained as they whispered among themselves. The media representatives positioned themselves strategically, their equipment ready to capture every moment. Yet even these seasoned professionals, who had covered countless royal events, sensed that today might produce something extraordinary. The usual protocols felt different, as if everyone involved understood they were about to participate in something that would be remembered long after. The cameras stopped rolling as the appointed hour approached. William and Catherine met in the palace's private study. Without speaking, they reached for each other's hands, finding strength in their partnership that had weathered so many storms. They had learned that their greatest power lay not in their individual roles, but in their ability to face the world together, sharing both its burdens and its joys. The moment had arrived. Palace doors would soon open, and they would step into a day that would touch hearts across the globe. Though neither of them could have predicted exactly how their simple gestures of compassion would create ripples of hope that would spread far beyond anything they had imagined. The palace doors opened with a ceremonial grandeur that never failed to create a moment of hushed reverence among the waiting crowds. William and Catherine emerged together, their synchronized steps speaking of years of shared experience and mutual support. The morning light caught the subtle details of their carefully chosen attire, but it was their expressions that truly captured the attention of everyone present. Catherine's smile held a warmth that seemed to reach every person in the crowd individually. She had learned over the years that her role required more than simply appearing at events. It demanded genuine connection with people from all walks of life. Today, that connection felt more important than ever. though she couldn't quite explain why her heart felt so full of purpose. William's demeanor showed the confidence of a man who had found his place in the world, yet retained the accessibility that made him beloved by the public. He had inherited his mother's gift for making people feel seen and valued. And today, that gift would be put to its greatest test. As they descended the palace steps, the first person they encountered was 8-year-old Emma, who had been waiting with her grandmother since dawn. The little girl held a drawing she had made of the royal family, complete with their pets and a rainbow overhead. When Catherine knelt down to Emma's eye level to accept the artwork, the child whispered something that made the princess's eyes glisten with unexpected tears. "My mummy is watching from heaven," Emma had said simply. "She told me you would understand." The moment lasted only seconds, but the photographer from the local newspaper captured Catherine's genuine emotional response as she embraced the child. That single photograph would later be shared millions of times across social media, not because it was staged or planned, but because it showed the raw humanity that exists even within the most formal of institutions. William watched this exchange with a mixture of pride and recognition. He understood better than most what it meant to feel a parent's presence in moments of significance. As they moved through the crowd, he found himself drawn to a group of veterans who had gathered near the palace gates. Their weathered faces told stories of service and sacrifice, and something in their respectful stance reminded him of his own military days. Among them stood James, a former sergeant who had served 3 tours overseas. James hadn't planned to come today, but something had compelled him to put on his best suit and make the journey from his small flat in South London. When William approached and extended his hand, James felt recognition pass between them. The unspoken understanding of men who had worn uniforms in service of something greater than themselves. "Thank you for your service," William said. Words that might have sounded routine but carried genuine respect. "Thank you for yours," Sir James replied, and both men understood they weren't just talking about military service, but about the different ways people choose to serve their communities and country. Meanwhile, Catherine had discovered Mrs. Rodriguez, who had brought her 3 young children despite the early morning hour. The children clutched small British flags and wore their best clothes, their eyes wide with wonder at seeing real royalty up close. Mrs. Rodriguez worked 2 jobs to support her family, and this outing represented a rare treat. A chance to show her children that dreams and fairy tales sometimes intersected with real life. When Catherine asked the children about their favorite subjects in school, their animated responses created a circle of laughter that drew other families closer. Soon, an impromptu gathering had formed, with parents sharing stories of their children's achievements and dreams while the young ones showed off their drawings and asked innocent questions about palace life. The royal security team maintained their professional vigilance while allowing these organic moments of connection to unfold naturally. They had learned that the most meaningful royal encounters couldn't be scripted or rushed. They happened when genuine curiosity met sincere interest from both sides. As the morning progressed, William and Catherine found themselves energized rather than drained by the interactions. Each conversation, each smile shared, each moment of laughter seemed to build upon the previous one, creating an atmosphere of celebration that had little to do with formal protocol and everything to do with human connection. The crowds continued to grow, but rather than becoming overwhelming, the gathering took on the feeling of a community celebration where strangers became temporary friends, united by shared experience and collective joy. As the royal couple moved deeper into the crowd, they encountered David, a middle-aged man who stood slightly apart from the others. His clothes were clean, but worn, and his hesitant posture suggested he wasn't entirely sure he belonged among the well-dressed families and excited children. David had been homeless for the past 6 months, sleeping in a nearby shelter, but something about today had drawn him to witness this royal visit. Catherine noticed him immediately, perhaps because his solitude contrasted so starkly with the animated groups surrounding him. Without hesitation, she approached David with the same genuine interest she had shown everyone else. Her security detail tensed slightly, but she continued forward with the confidence of someone who had learned to trust her instincts about people. "Good morning," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm so glad you came today." David's surprise was evident as he shook her hand, his voice barely a whisper when he replied, "I wasn't sure I should be here." "Your Royal Highness, everyone deserves to be here," Catherine responded, her words carrying a conviction that surprised even her. "We're all part of the same community." Their conversation lasted only a few minutes. But David later told anyone who would listen that those few minutes had reminded him of his own worth as a human being. Sometimes the most profound moments happen not in grand gestures, but in simple acknowledgments of dignity and belonging. William, meanwhile, had been drawn to a group of teachers from a local primary school who had brought their pupils on an educational trip. Miss Sarah, a young teacher in her first year, nervously explained how she had organized the visit to help her students understand British history and civic pride. Her enthusiasm was infectious, even as she stumbled over her words in the presence of the future king. "Teaching is one of the most important jobs in the world," William told her, noting how her students gathered around her protectively. "You're shaping the future every single day." The validation from someone in his position meant everything to Miss Sarah, who had been questioning whether she was making a real difference in her students' lives. Her 9-year-old student Marcus, who struggled with reading, had been skeptical about the trip until this moment. Seeing his teacher treated with such respect by a prince helped Marcus understand that education was something valuable and worthy of effort. As the morning sun climbed higher, creating a natural warmth that seemed to mirror the emotional temperature of the gathering, an unexpected challenge presented itself. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman in a wheelchair, had positioned herself at the edge of the crowd but couldn't see over the standing spectators. Her adult daughter looked frustrated, having promised her mother a chance to see the royals but unable to find a better vantage point without being prompted by their staff. Both William and Catherine simultaneously noticed Mrs. Chen's situation. They exchanged a brief look, the kind of wordless communication that develops between couples who have learned to work as a team, and made their way directly to her location. Catherine knelt beside the wheelchair, while William crouched on the other side, both of them bringing themselves to Mrs. Chen's eye level. The elderly woman's face lit up with joy and surprise. She found herself the center of their attention rather than a forgotten observer at the periphery. "Thank you for coming to see us," Catherine said, taking Mrs. Chen's weathered hand in both of hers. "Would you tell us about yourself?" Mrs. Chen, who had immigrated to Britain 50 years earlier and had worked as a seamstress to support her family, began to share her story in accented English mixed with tears of gratitude. She spoke of watching royal events on television throughout the decades, never imagining she would one day meet royalty in person. William listened intently as she described her late husband's service in the British Army and her pride in her British-born children and grandchildren. When she mentioned that she had sewn costumes for her granddaughter's school play about British history, Catherine asked to see photos on her daughter's phone. Genuinely interested in the intricate details of the handmade clothing, the crowd around them had gone quiet, everyone understanding they were witnessing something special. Cameras clicked and phones recorded, but the technology seemed secondary to the human drama unfolding. This wasn't a photo opportunity or a publicity stunt. It was simply two people in positions of privilege choosing to honor and celebrate someone whose contributions might otherwise go unnoticed. When they finally stood to continue their walkabout, Mrs. Chen was crying openly, but they were tears of joy and validation. Her daughter whispered "thank you" repeatedly, knowing that this moment would become a treasured family story passed down through generations. The ripple effects of such encounters were already becoming apparent throughout the crowd, as people began engaging with each other differently, inspired by the examples of genuine connection they were witnessing. The atmosphere in the crowd had transformed into something magical and unexpected. Strangers were introducing themselves to one another, sharing stories and forming connections that might never have happened without this catalyst of royal presence. The formal barriers that usually existed in British society seemed to dissolve in the warmth of shared experience and collective joy. Among the crowd stood Dr. Aisha Patel, a newly qualified doctor who had been working exhausting shifts at the local hospital throughout the pandemic. She hadn't planned to attend the royal visit, but her colleagues had insisted she'd take a morning off after months of selfless service. When William and Catherine approached her group of medical professionals, Dr. Patel felt overwhelmed by exhaustion and emotion. Catherine immediately recognized telltale signs of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for too long. As a patron of various health-related charities, she had met countless healthcare workers and understood the toll their dedication took on their personal lives. "You've been taking care of everyone else," Catherine observed gently. "Who's been taking care of you?" The question hit Dr. Patel unexpectedly hard. She had been so focused on her patients that she had forgotten to consider her own well-being. When she began to explain the challenges facing healthcare workers, her voice cracked with suppressed emotion. William, who had always admired the courage of people in essential services, listened intently as Dr. Patel described the difficult decisions she faced, daily, and the weight of responsibility she carried. He understood from his own experience that leadership often meant making choices that affected other people's lives. Though his circumstances were vastly different from hers, "Your service saves lives every day," he told her. That kind of dedication deserves recognition and support. Not just applause, the conversation highlighted systemic issues that went far beyond what any individual could solve. But it also provided Dr. Patel with something she desperately needed: acknowledgement that her struggles were seen and valued by others. Nearby, a group of teenagers from various backgrounds had gathered. Their initial excitement about seeing royalty evolving into genuine curiosity about the conversations they were witnessing. 16-year-old Kai, whose family had moved to Britain from Jamaica, had been skeptical about the relevance of the monarchy to his life. But watching William and Catherine engage with people who looked like his neighbors and family members was challenging his assumptions. When Catherine noticed the teenagers and approached them directly, asking about their plans and dreams, Kai found himself explaining his ambitions to study engineering. He was surprised by her genuine interest and her knowledge about technical subjects. Having expected royal conversations to focus on more traditional topics, innovation comes from diverse perspectives, Catherine told the group. "Your generation will solve problems that we can't even imagine yet." William joined the conversation, sharing his own experiences with young people through various charitable initiatives. When teenager Sophie mentioned her struggles with anxiety about the future, he spoke honestly about his own journey with mental health. Removing the stigma by treating it as a normal part of human experience, the teenagers left that conversation feeling heard and validated in ways they hadn't expected. Several of them later mentioned that the encounter had changed their perception of what leadership could look like, showing them that authority figures could be approachable and genuinely interested in their well-being. As the royal couple continued their walkabout, they encountered Maria, a single mother who had brought her twin boys to the event despite financial constraints that made such outings rare treats. Maria worked as a cleaning lady at several locations to make ends meet, often leaving her children with neighbors while she worked evening shifts. The boys, aged 7, were practically vibrating with excitement, asking endless questions about the palace, the guards, and whether the royals really ate with golden spoons. Their innocent enthusiasm brought smiles to everyone around them, including their often worried mother, who rarely saw them this carefree. Catherine knelt down to chat with the twins, asking about their favorite subjects in school and listening patiently to their rapid-fire questions. When one boy mentioned that his mother worked very hard but was always tired, Catherine's heart went out to Maria. Recognizing the challenges of single parenthood even within her very different circumstances, "Your sons are wonderful," Catherine told Maria. "You should be very proud of the job you're doing." The simple affirmation meant everything to Maria, who rarely received acknowledgement for her efforts. Most days, she felt like she was barely keeping her head above water. But this moment of recognition reminded her that her sacrifices were worthwhile and noticed. William engaged with the boys, questions about royal duties, explaining his role in terms they could understand while making them feel important and intelligent. When they asked if being a prince was fun, he answered honestly that it came with both privileges and responsibilities, just like their roles. As sons and students, the encounter with Maria and her children encapsulated something important about the day's events: the power of recognition and the ways that simple human connections could bridge enormous gaps in circumstance, and experience. As the afternoon sun reached its peak, casting a golden glow over the entire gathering, an unexpected moment of vulnerability changed the entire tone of the day. Among the crowd stood Robert, a middle-aged man whose weathered hands and gentle demeanor immediately caught William's attention. Robert had served as a firefighter for 25 years before a workplace injury forced his early retirement, and he now struggled with both physical limitations and the loss of identity that came with leaving a career he loved. When William approached and asked about his background, Robert hesitated before mentioning his firefighting service. The conversation that followed revealed the deep pride Robert still felt in his former profession. Mixed with grief for the life he could no longer live, his eyes lit up when he described rescuing families from burning buildings, but dimmed when he mentioned his current struggles with chronic pain and depression. Heroes don't stop being heroes when they can no longer wear the uniform, William said quietly, his words carrying the weight of personal understanding. Your service will always matter. The conversation touched something deep within Robert, who had been feeling invisible since his retirement. For the first time in months, he felt seen and valued for who he was, rather than pitied for what he could no longer do. The encounter reminded him that his contributions had permanent value. Regardless of his current limitations, Catherine, meanwhile, had discovered Hannah. A young woman in her early 20s who had been battling cancer for the past 2 years. Hannah's bright headscarf and determined smile couldn't quite hide the fatigue in her eyes. But her presence at the royal visit demonstrated her refusal to let illness define her entire existence. When Catherine learned about Hannah's situation, she didn't offer empty platitudes or false optimism. Instead, she spoke honestly about fear, courage, and the importance of finding moments of joy even during the darkest times. Her approach validated Hannah's experience without dismissing the reality of her challenges. You're braver than you know, Catherine told her, and stronger than you feel. Hannah had attended the royal visit partly as a distraction from her medical appointments and partly as a way to create positive memories during a difficult period. The genuine connection she felt with Catherine gave her something precious, proof that her life still had value and meaning beyond her illness. Their conversation attracted the attention of Dr. Martinez, the oncologist who had been accompanying Hannah as a friend rather than in a professional capacity. When Dr. Martinez was introduced to the royal couple, the discussion naturally turned to medical research and the importance of hope in healing, whose charitable work had brought him into contact with many medical professionals, asked thoughtful questions about recent advances in cancer treatment. His genuine interest and informed questions impressed Dr. Martinez, who often felt that public figures paid only superficial attention to medical issues. The three-way conversation between Catherine, Hannah, and Dr. Martinez created a powerful moment that illustrated the connections between patients, caregivers, and the broader community. Hannah later said that seeing her doctor treated with such respect and interest made her feel more confident about her treatment team and more hopeful about her prospects. As these meaningful encounters continued throughout the afternoon, the crowd began to self-organize in unexpected ways. Plans to stay in touch. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman from Yorkshire, found herself deep in conversation with Maria, the single mother, discovering they shared common experiences of resilience and determination. The teenagers, initially skeptical about the relevance of royal events to their lives, were now discussing what they had learned about leadership, service, and community engagement. Several of them mentioned plans to get more involved in local volunteer activities. Inspired by the examples of civic engagement they had witnessed, even the media representatives, typically focused on capturing the perfect photograph or soundbite, found themselves moved by the authentic emotions they were documenting. Sarah, a photographer for a national newspaper, later admitted that she had stopped thinking about getting the best shot and instead focused on preserving genuine moments of human connection. The security personnel, trained to maintain professional distance, were also affected by the day's events. They had seen many royal engagements, but rarely had they witnessed such sustained emotional intensity and authentic interaction between the royal family and the public. As the formal walkabout portion of the day began to wind down, Both William and Catherine seemed reluctant to leave. The energy from their interactions with the crowd had been invigorating rather than draining, and they had clearly been affected by the stories they had heard and the connections they had made. The crowd, too, showed no signs of wanting to disperse. Instead of the usual pattern where people gradually drift away after the main event, this gathering had taken on a life of its own. Strangers who had shared emotional moments throughout the day were now forming lasting friendships based on their common experience of witnessing and participating in something truly special. As the day progressed, toward evening, something unprecedented began to happen. Instead of the usual protocol where royal visits conclude with formal farewells and departures, William and Catherine made a spontaneous decision that surprised their staff and security detail. They asked if they could extend their time with the crowd, sensing that the connections being formed were too important to cut short. The extended interaction allowed for deeper conversations and more meaningful exchanges. Thomas, a war veteran who had initially hung back from the crowds due to social anxiety related to his PTSD, finally found the courage to approach after watching hours of compassionate interactions. When he began to share his struggles with readjusting to civilian life, William listened with the understanding of someone who had worked extensively with military communities. "The battles you fight now are just as important as the ones you fought overseas," William told Thomas, "and you don't have to fight them alone." The conversation led to William connecting Thomas with support services he hadn't known existed. But more importantly, it gave Thomas hope that his struggles were understood and that help was available. Other veterans in the crowd overheard parts of the conversation and began approaching Thomas themselves, forming an impromptu support network right there on the palace grounds. Catherine, meanwhile, had been drawn into conversation with a group of young mothers who were dealing with the challenges of raising children while managing their own mental health concerns. Her openness about the difficulties of parenthood, even within privileged circumstances, helped normalize their struggles and reduce the isolation many of them felt. When one mother, Jessica, mentioned her postpartum depression, Catherine shared resources and spoke candidly about the importance of seeking help without shame. The conversation expanded to include other women who had similar experiences, creating a support network that continued long after the royal visit ended. The most powerful moment of the extended gathering came when old Mrs. Patterson, who was 93 years old and had attended royal events for 7 decades, asked if she could share something important with both William and Catherine together. Supported by her great-granddaughter, she slowly made her way to where they stood. "I've watched this family through war and peace, joy and sorrow," she began, her voice still strong despite her age. "Today reminded me why we need each other. Not because of titles or positions, because we're all human beings trying to do our best." Her words created a moment of profound silence in the crowd. Here was someone who had witnessed the evolution of the monarchy across generations, offering her perspective on what truly mattered. When she finished speaking, spontaneous applause broke out. Not for the royal couple, but for Mrs. Patterson herself and the wisdom she represented, the emotional impact of her words was evident on both William and Catherine's faces. They had been moved by individual stories throughout the day. Mrs. Patterson's reflection helped them understand the broader significance of what had occurred. They weren't just meeting subjects. They were participating in a community celebration of human dignity and connection. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the palace grounds, the crowd naturally evolved into smaller conversation groups. Families who had never met were sharing contact information, planning future get-togethers, and discovering common interests and challenges. The royal visit had become a catalyst for community building in ways no one had anticipated. Dr. Patel, the exhausted physician from earlier in the day, found herself in conversation with Hannah, the cancer patient, and Dr. Martinez. Their discussion about healthcare challenges and patient experiences led to plans for improved communication between medical teams and patients. A chance meeting had sparked ideas that could potentially improve care for countless people. The teenagers, led by Kai and Sophie, had formed their own discussion group about social issues and their role in creating positive change. Their conversation with William and Catherine had inspired them to think about leadership in new ways. and they were already planning community service projects and advocacy initiatives. Even the media representatives found themselves part of the story rather than just observers of it. Several journalists approached the people they had been photographing to learn more about their experiences, resulting in follow-up stories that would extend the day's impact far beyond the immediate event. As the formal conclusion of the visit approached, both William and Catherine took time to personally thank the palace staff who had helped make the day possible. Their security team, the groundskeepers, the communications staff, and everyone else who had contributed to the success of the event received individual acknowledgement for their efforts. The departure, when it finally came, felt more like the end of a family reunion than the conclusion of a formal royal engagement. People lingered, reluctant to break the spell that had been cast throughout the day. The sense of community that had been created felt too precious to simply abandon by walking away. The days that followed the royal visit revealed the true measure of its impact. What had begun as a single day of connection rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted, touching lives and creating changes that extended far beyond the palace grounds. Mrs. Chen, the elderly seamstress who had shared her story from her wheelchair, received dozens of letters from people who had seen news coverage of her encounter with William and Catherine. Fellow immigrants wrote to thank her for representing their experiences with such dignity, while young people expressed admiration for her resilience and contributions to British society. Her daughter later said that her mother had never felt more valued or respected in all her 50 years in the country. Thomas, the veteran who had overcome his social anxiety to share his PTSD struggles, became an unexpected advocate for military mental health services. His story, shared with his permission by various media outlets, helped other veterans realize they weren't alone in their struggles. The support network that had spontaneously formed during the royal visit grew into a formal veterans group that met weekly and provided ongoing peer support. Dr. Patel found that our brief conversation with the royal couple had given her renewed purpose in her medical career. The acknowledgement she had received for her service during the pandemic helped her remember why she had chosen medicine in the first place. She began mentoring younger healthcare workers, sharing not just clinical knowledge, but also insights about maintaining compassion and resilience in demanding circumstances. Hannah, the young cancer patient, discovered that her public interaction with Catherine had inspired other young people facing serious illnesses. She began writing a blog about her experiences, focusing on finding joy and meaning during difficult times. Her writing reached thousands of people worldwide, creating a community of support for others facing similar challenges. The teenagers who had participated in conversations about leadership and social responsibility followed through on their commitments to community engagement. Kai organized a STEM mentoring program for younger students, while Sophie started an anxiety support group at her school. Their friends, inspired by their examples, initiated their own projects addressing various social issues. Miss Sarah, the young teacher who had received validation for her educational efforts, found renewed confidence in her classroom abilities. Her students, who had witnessed her interaction with William, began to see education in a new light. Several parents later commented that their children had shown increased interest in learning after seeing their teacher treated with such respect by the future king. Maria, the single mother whose twins had charmed everyone with their enthusiasm, received unexpected support from other parents she had met during the royal visit. What began as casual conversations evolved into a network of mutual assistance, with families helping each other with childcare, transportation, and emotional support during difficult times. The impact extended to the royal couple themselves. William and Catherine found that the experience had deepened their understanding of their roles and responsibilities. The authentic connections they had made reminded them why public service mattered and inspired them to seek more opportunities for meaningful engagement with diverse communities. Palace staff noticed changes in how future royal events were planned and executed. The success of the extended, informal interactions led to modifications in protocol that allowed for more spontaneous connections between the royal family and the public. Security procedures were adjusted to accommodate the kind of genuine engagement that had made the day so powerful. The media coverage of the event focused not just on the royal couple's actions, but on the stories of the people they had met. This shift in narrative emphasis helped humanize both the monarchy and the broader community, showing how individual acts of recognition and connection could create positive change. 6 months later, many of the connections formed during that single day continued to flourish. Mrs. Thompson and Maria, despite their different backgrounds and ages, maintained a friendship that enriched both their lives. The veteran support group had expanded to include family members and had begun advocating for policy changes to improve military, mental health services. The royal visit had become legendary not because of grand gestures or expensive displays, but because it had demonstrated the power of simple human connection. People who had attended began referring to it as the day everything changed, though they often struggled to articulate exactly what had transformed. Years later, when historians look back at this particular royal engagement, they noted it as a turning point in how the monarchy connected with the public. But for the hundreds of people whose lives had been touched that day, it remained something more personal and profound. Proof that recognition, dignity, and compassion could bridge any gap between people. Regardless of their circumstances or positions in society, the true legacy of that royal moment was not captured in photographs or news reports, but lived on in the countless small acts of kindness and connection that continued to ripple outward, creating a more compassionate and connected community one interaction at a time. It had been, as many participants said, a day that reminded everyone involved of the best aspects of human nature and the possibility for positive change in the world.